and live your life today. It doesn't matter what they say.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode of Red Lotus Life. This is Sara Elizabeth, my co-host and co-creator
Mhm.
here. We have been in huge, just a lot of depth. We've been going deep in conversations and Say Yes to Soul, which has rippled out into conversations that you and I have had around transactional relationships. And we thought, you know what, this would be really good to bring into this space and onto the
Mhm.
channel, and then also go even deeper in Patreon and be a little more transparent about some specific situations in our lives. So curious as to what you would like to start out with, Sara.
I'd love to talk about really what is a transactional relationship and then how is that related to the provider and maybe even like the mother or the father, the role of the mother or the father, and how that shows up for us generationally and even ancestrally.
Mhm. Yeah, we don't know where these conversations ever take us, but yep, we would definitely want to talk about, or I know I do, about the healthy parts of matriarch and patriarchs in the family and the households and the extended family. And then, yes, how is that related to provider, the role of provider, and what that would actually look like if we had that in our lives. And I say ours as like a collective, right? The next generation coming up, if they had supportive and healthy matriarchs and patriarchs in the households and in the extended family, how would life be different? What kind of life would they be creating, and what kind of decisions would they be making? So, yeah, it's gonna be good.
Yeah, it is going to be good. It's been fun to journey with as we've sort of allowed the conversation to develop and sort of felt into the direction that we wanted to go with the conversation because we both have both very similar, but also different lenses and different experiences, especially like uh, those people who maybe you are surrounded by as compared to who I'm surrounded by, but also zooming out and looking at the big picture of the collective and what's actually present. Um, and how we see these pockets, like small pockets, maybe in a more conscious community settings, and how those roles are often fulfilled to a greater extent due to the fact that they are practicing, they are doing the inner work in order to become um, better role models for all of these things. And so we're starting to see in some places where generationally it's changing and shifting.
Mhm.
But I feel like we're just at the very tip of the iceberg with that.
Oh, I know. I mean, just even you and I talking this morning, we realized how very different our lenses were, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Like how different our lenses are, our perspectives, um,
But
our
also same.
experiences.
It's
Yeah,
also the same.
it was also the same. Like underneath all of it, the root of it was the same. And
Yeah.
so that was actually super cool for us to journey with even that. So I'm not exactly sure where this conversation is going to take us. Not sure how long this will be or anything like that, but um going back to transactional relationships, that is something that we've been journeying with quite a bit. Um, and just as you were saying earlier today, all relationships are transactional to some extent. And I think
Yeah.
this was actually opened up for me when I was thinking about unconditional love. And I, I've been called cynical quite a bit on other podcasts and stuff like that because I will say that I don't feel as if there is such a thing as unconditional love, but I get misunderstood every time I say that because I even think about, and they go, well, aren't you a mother? And yeah, I'm a mother. Well, don't you have unconditional love? And I said, yes. And there's this and like there's nuances to this because yes, unconditional love, and I also expect certain standards in the relationship that I have with my children. If that makes sense. My children are older now, so I think it also has to do with like adult children. I'm not saying it's not unconditional. I'm just saying I'm not going to be a doormat. I'm not going to be a doormat. And you can, come and go as you please. Like this was the type of things that was happening in my life, which I'll go more into on Patreon. But it was more of, that's when I realized, okay, so there is some transaction happening here.
Well, yeah.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and then I ended up having a conversation with my husband about that because there was also it wasn't boundaries being set. It was more, well, this has to happen in order for this to happen. And then now that's the transactional relationship, right?
Yeah, totally. I'd like to go back to this idea of unconditional love because I think this is a really important aspect. For me, I do believe that there is, I mean, of course, we're mothers, we're parents, we're grandparents, like there is unconditional love. And I think that that energy is always present. But like you're saying, the difference is when the boundaries come into play. So in any relationship, for me, whether or not I hold a space of unconditional love in my heart, it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that for me to feel safe, sometimes that might look like there needs to be distance, there needs to be boundaries, there needs to be communication. So it's almost like both and.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm glad
Yeah.
you're bringing this up because
Yeah.
when we put boundaries in place as parents, that's when people they confuse that with not having unconditional love.
Right.
And they'll
Exactly.
take that as in, oh, but you're always supposed to be there for me or this and that, whatever. I mean, that's like a whole nother rabbit hole that we could go down. But yeah, that's actually what I speak of when I get misunderstood. And then
Hmm.
that's also when I've held those boundaries with my children as a parent. That's also when it gets misunderstood.
Right. Yeah. Um, I mean, kids often misunderstand boundaries anyway, right? I don't know. I don't even want to, that's kind of unfair to say children because I feel like just collectively speaking, if you're not actively doing work around boundaries and having healthy no's and having healthy yeses, boundaries are often blurred and often confused. And that's a topic that we've talked about many, many times on this podcast. So, or here on YouTube.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, there's so many. You can actually go and check it out. We've even done stuff on the misrepresentation of self-love and all kinds of stuff, boundary workshops and everything. So you can definitely go check out the channel. But it's so yeah, that is quite fascinating because if we look at, so we're in the work of releasing conditioning and releasing emotional blocks and all of that around that and energetic imprints and all kinds of stuff. And so if you even look at like what people say, they're like, oh, but what is it? Blood over water or something. I don't even, what are the phrases now? I'm so like not in that world anymore that I have a hard time coming up with the terminology and phrases.
Well, I mean, it might even just be like family first.
Mm-hmm. Just all of that. It's so
Blood is thicker than water.
that's what it is.
That's
Blood is thicker than water. And then saying that like that kind of goes along with the whole unconditional love for family and everything. But there's some stuff there, right? There's some stuff there. People aren't going to just bend over backwards for some of the things. So anyway,
Mhm.
that's what we're here to talk about today is transactional relationships and what do they look like? Let's start with that first. What do they look like?
Transactional relationships. So nearly every relationship, or I would say every relationship, has some transaction component to it. There's always going to be some kind of reciprocity, especially within, I mean, in any given dynamic, right? So I'll do this for you, and there's an expectation for something to be done in return, which can be very healthy when it's healthy reciprocity, when there is depth, when there is healthy communication, when there are healthy boundaries, when there is emotional intelligence and a feeling of like gratitude underneath, appreciation underneath, those things that are being done for one another. So that would be sort of a healthier transactional relationship. And we have that with our children. We have that between mothers and fathers, between grandparents. It looks a million different ways, right? Within friendships, it's there in all ways. But the thing that I have found, and this is sort of a breakdown, just collectively speaking within society, is that when those transactional relationships are not modeled in a healthy way, and that's passed down generationally, then what we end up with are really unhealthy matriarchs and patriarchs. And we end up with a breakdown in like maybe it's a strong father figure because they didn't have a strong father figure, because they don't have the coping mechanisms or the tools that they needed initially. And so generationally, that same behavior is passed down. And, the same for a mother. And so it just continues to break down a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And so what happens to those people who are in those family units is then we end up getting back into these relationships or the same types of relationships, and even leaning towards the extreme end of what we often talk about here is the abusive relationships. And that happens between parents, that happens between the mother and the father, or whatever that relationship looks like.
One of the things that sparked this conversation and why we wanted it to bring it to everyone here was this idea of the transactional relationship that happens between a parent. So we're going to be focusing on parental transactional relationships today. I don't think I said that in the beginning, but the relationship between the parent and the child, right? And so when we really started to break this down and really dissect it, what we realized is how much the family unit is really not there and hasn't been for generations now, and how that may or may not be affecting our children and the generations that are coming. And what we were talking about was I can't remember. I mean, I'm still trying to even bring up some examples. I'll be bringing up very specific examples in Patreon. But for this space, I'm trying to even bring up examples of where I can even see it besides in the cultural, right? So like in the Polynesian families, I brought that up, the Polynesian families, the Polynesian cultures, South American countries, and those from Mexico and places like that, and like that type of, and I'm sure there's others. These are just the ones that's coming to my mind now. I can see this healthy modeling of parenting when we're talking matriarchal and patriarchal being passed down and handed down. Like we were talking about the placeholder, right? It's like it just kind of gets passed down. But those families, there's still original, like there's not a divorce or a split or anything like that. One of the things that we were taught, that I was actually bringing into the conversation, was that there's all these, and I am this as well, like divorced, right? Divorced, so there's been a split in the family, and then married. So there's like blended families, and then even those blended families split. And now we have all these children that are below us that have had all of these different parental figures. But then when the original couple is not together anymore, like the parents, regardless if that's parent or step parent, once that is no longer there, does the relationship still continue with the child, even though they've raised them?
Right. And my experience is usually not.
Same.
Usually not. The
Yeah.
relationships are very transactional and not in the most healthy way, almost from the get-go. And I don't want to speak too generally because there are those families out there who, there is a healthy father figure, there is a healthy mother figure who are doing a beautiful job.
Mhm.
But more often than not, what we see is the breakdown, right? And
Mhm.
so when you are just coming into a relationship and all of a sudden now you're the bonus mom or the bonus dad, so to speak.
Mhm.
What happens if you aren't actually taking on the responsibility and um, the emotional intelligence, the ability to act as if that child is your own, and then continue to cultivate the relationship even after, say, there's a divorce.
Mhm.
Like, what do you do when you raise a child, say, from the age of 9 to the age of 20? Then, what is it within that we don't have that capacity?
Well, and now this is looking at our generations before us, right? Because even as you were
Mhm.
talking about that and
Right.
speaking about it, I have to share something right here. I did not even think about this. This is actually super funny because this is a 100% example. So if I'm looking at my generation before me, my stepfather who raised me, so if anybody knows me and I say dad, this is who I'm talking about. He raised me since the time I was 5. He actually remarried after my mother, a woman that I can't even remember her name. Like I'm sitting here going, I don't even it was such a transactional relationship. So she would have been a stepmother, right? To me.
Mhm.
I can see what she looks like. Don't remember her name. Zero relationship after.
Mhm.
Like so I'm now looking at the patterns that I am passing down, right? And like I would hope I actually have not been in another relationship where I've raised someone else's child, so I don't have that example or experience to share. But I would really hope that like I encourage the same thing. Actually, I'm thinking here, and again, I'll give specifics in Patreon. But like with my children and the different bonus moms they've had in their life,
Mhm.
yeah, there's not a relationship that has continued and or even with me. And I really enjoyed some of those friendships. So it's fascinating. I didn't even think about it until just now. I started connecting some of those dots.
Yeah. And how beautiful is it that, when you do have that space where you can connect with even the other mom, the bonus mom or father, whatever the case may be, that you could hopefully create like this conscious
Yeah.
environment, this conscious family unit, and be able to continue those relationships. But it just doesn't happen. So what really needs to happen in order for us to get to a place where we are capable of creating those dynamics?
Yeah. So if I'm thinking about like myself, it just wasn't expected. It was so that's telling me right now, in at least in the um place in the world where I am, this is normal. I
It-
didn't think twice about it.
right.
And it was like we had a relationship when that dynamic was happening, but once that dynamic was no longer there, it wasn't there. So again, so now this is to me what looks like a transactional relationship.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I would be so interested to hear what other people have to say about this because totally forgot about her. So
Yeah.
now let's go back to, are you okay with me moving on
Yeah,
with this?
absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to run
Sure.
with this for a second because that blew my mind just now that I didn't even remember her. So let's just say her and I continued to have a relationship and it was a healthy matriarch type relationship, right? What kind of choices would I have made? If I would have had healthy, besides my own mother, if I had all of these bonus people in my life that were showing me and teaching me and modeling, coaching me, mentoring me on emotional intelligence and confidence and self-esteem and love and all these other ways, it does make me go, what kind of life would I be creating now? What kind of choices would I have made? What would be different if I would have had an even stronger foundation supporting me?
It makes all the difference in the world. I mean, when we talk about conditioning, we work with conditioning that's usually, I don't want to necessarily say negative because it's always part of our life experience and our journey and our purpose work and all of that. But also, what if the conditioning were positive? We have positive conditioning that then gets passed down generationally. Then we create stronger family units. We're creating stronger family units and really stronger societies, stronger collectives down the road.
Mm-hmm. Which is why when you were speaking of it, you were saying, yeah, I know of conscious communities, like I do too. I know of conscious communities, and then other than that, I know of cultural ones.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's a very fascinating subject. And I'm not sure if there's anything more that I want to share here because I have so much more to say, but I want to say it over there.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that you wanted to share about this right now?
Not right now, but meet us on Patreon for sure.
Yeah. And I would absolutely love to hear everyone else's thoughts. And if maybe this may have even sparked and ignited some memories for you of some past relationships that you've had that were parental relationships that you may wish were still in your life, because we could all use that wise, that wise mentorship in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And they always say it takes a tribe or it takes a village, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Okay. Well, we hope you enjoyed this. And if you'd like to meet us on Patreon, we will be over there to share more. Okay. We'll see you next time. Bye.
And live your life today. It doesn't matter what they say.